Hi, I'm Seamless, and today I'm going to teach you how to make this bass. Anyway, this is Vocodex plus channel resampling, which I just demonstrated a whole bunch of just then with channel resampling. I have a whole separate tutorial that's just on that, but today is also going to include how to make a neato, sort of cool sounding Vocodex business. So, like all Vocodex basses, it starts with the carrier, which by itself sounds like this. Yeah. Anyway, this carrier is interesting. It's very compact, but it's also a little complicated. So at its core is a saw wave that's going out. Operator 1's a saw wave. Operator 2 was a saw wave, but then I transformed it into sine harmonics. You do this by, if you take it and write any other, operator, you have a saw wave, any waveform at all. If you just change it around, you can still do the same process. If you have the saw wave, and you right click it, you say convert the sine harmonics, creates the same saw wave in harmonics. And then I got rid of the fundamental tone. It was actually, I had a reason for doing that, but I ended up not utilizing the reason that I had that for. But it's okay, because the result would end up being cool. It looks not like a saw wave, because I have different phase and different harmonics going on the lower end of the graph here, which is what that represents. The bottom of the graph represents phase, and top of the graph represents amplitude of harmonics. This operator is modulating operator 1 and operator 3. However, operator 3 is at pitch 0.02. Considering that the rest of these guys are at 0.25, that is a considerably lower sound. And in fact, by itself, without that and without being modulated, it sounds like this. You cannot hear that, but we can see it. If you look at the waveform, then also look at the doohickey at the up top, the waveform viewer. We can see the amplitude moving up and down. This is actually a pretty big core aspect of the sound in general. But also what it's doing is it's modulating operator 2, which is changing the pitch of operator 2, which is of course changing how fast operator 2 modulates operator 1. I changed it a little bit by accident. You might be thinking, okay, well, why is it that we can still hear modulation even if I'm not modulating anything by operator 3? And that's because operator 3 is going out. The giant amplitude change that operator 3 is having, albeit very slow and not fast enough for us to detect as being a tone, still affects the sound because it's adding amplitude to the original sound itself, just in a very odd way. And it's very interesting. So that's how this guy worked, and that was a lot of fun. So that's going into the Vocodex, and then I also have the modulator. And the modulator is me talking and saying things. But not only that, I also kind of applied a little bit of the channel resampling ideas to my voice samples here. I changed the pitch, which is pretty easy to do. I also reversed it, and then I changed it by using the speech time stretching algorithm, which you can do. Which the algorithms here you can use to change the time without changing pitch, but also to change pitch. Although changing time without changing pitch is actually still changing pitch, because you're still changing the pitch to make it if you elongate a sample, you're making it play slower, which means you're changing the pitch lower, and then for it to sound at the original pitch, that means you have to pitch it up. So really, time and pitch are kind of the same thing, but we can just sort of control them in a conceptually different way, just to make it easier for us, which is nice, don't you think? So that's how I got this guy to sound like that, plus a whole bunch of compression, just to kind of even it out, and then some EQing to control some of the low end stuff. Well, at the end, I'm not really mattering because of easy Vocodex stuff I'll talk about right now. So without all these post stuff, it sounds like this. First thing I did was in the gain multiplier, I turned off the low end and turned on the low end for the carrier pass through. This is to ensure that the low end is nice and stable, which is what I was talking about not having to worry about the low end being too muddy with the modulator because it wasn't going to be there anyway. So up on the top, the face of everything, I kept the pitch change where it is. I engaged a little bit of unison with voice 2 and a little bit of stereo separation, which is nice. The bandwidth multiplier is a little bit to the right, which makes it just it tries to lean more towards what the original modulator is doing, more so than it would otherwise. And then the bandwidth is up a little bit. Bandwidth fatness is all the way up, but I'm on order 2, 75 voices. I've turned off minimum times, and then I have release and hold as the only two active parameters as attack is all the way off. Now, that's all well and good, but I also do a whole bunch of stuff with the drop-down menus. Now, I mentioned this every time I mention Vocodex because this is actually, it's important that you understand this about it, that most of these knobs, in fact, every single one except for the unison knob, has a counterpart graph. Like, for example, this knob, the wet knob, has a counterpart gain multiplier, which turns it to, changes part of it on, like, up or down per band. And then the bandwidth guy has its own graph, which I changed up a little bit, which changes how wide certain bands are at what band. So we can tell it that we want, say, one whole section to be wider or shorter, wider or thicker. Wide and short have nothing to do with each other. And so same deal with attack and not the attack, hold and release. I also messed around with, which are two things I tend not to mess around with, but this time I ended up working out pretty good. So this is saying that the higher frequencies have a longer release time than the lower frequencies, which is neat. What else am I doing? I turned the bandwidth distribution so that it's full, because by default it's like this. And what this is basically saying is it's telling us what section of, like, the actual spectrum that all of the bands occupy. And this is just saying that the bands occupy the whole spectrum. And I believe that's everything that I messed with here. Oh yeah, no, the modulator pitch shift. So the reason why I tend not to mess with the pitch shift up here, at least not when it's not the start, is because I mess with it here in modulator pitch shift window, which changes the pitch of bands per band. So like you have much more control over things when you do that. Once you've done this, though, like once you've created basically the profiles for all of these parameters, sometimes you can use the sort of like global control. Like if I control the pitch globally, it can be cool. So that's the Vocodex. And I compressed it to kind of even out the frequencies in the low, mid, and high, so that because they aren't, you can kind of tell they're not. On the master, I'm using actual limiting to keep everything below 0 dB, just because instead of using saturation, because it didn't really sound very good to me. In the convolver, I'm doing something weird. So I've loaded in a saw wave without the lowest harmonic. Because I really just wanted something short and clicky to put in there, just because. And without the dry, this is what it sounds like. Which is kind of cool. It's EQ'd to kind of like fit with the other guy more. Stretched all the way to give it like a little bit more longevity. And then I have a little bit of stereo going in there, this is actually a pretty good way to add stereo to things because it's not dependent on the source material. And it could be different. Stereo imaging is all about making things different from each other, because otherwise you'll have one leaning one way or the other. And that's not good. And then I record into Edison, and I put it in a channel. So in the channel, we can do all kinds of stuff to it. Like, I like using monophonic. That was the one that I was using in the intro when I was messing around with it. Monophonic is a nice sharp sounding time stretch algorithm, but other ones are cool too. Like the tonal one is neat. But I like the monophonic. And one thing I kind of want to demonstrate, it has much more impact than you might think, and is reversing things. Especially this, because at the low points of this, if I play those backwards, something weird happens. suddenly you get a lot squelchier than you would really think it would be. And this is because we're basically playing saw waves backwards. And if you think about from a sharp automation perspective, if I turn this into an LFO and then skew it, just kind of demonstrate visually what I'm talking about. Sharp automation, we get this kind of thing. When we think about what this does, here we go tick, 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 pew, 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 tick, tick. We hear the click of the hit here. But then if we reversed it, if we had it go the other way, we hear kind of a whoosh. It's like whoop, 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 whoop kind of thing. And so that's basically what we're doing when we reverse something that's based on saw waves, is that it turns into a more sort of whippy, squelchy kind of thing. So this is that's a very quick thing to sort of for something to become squelchy. So I thought that was very interesting. And some people might be like, well, reverse samples, man. That's the cool thing to do. But sometimes you don't, because you think that okay, well, the sound's not going to sound that different reversed. You never know what it's going to sound like reversed. So just give it a shot. Anyway, if you have any questions about any of this, let me know. And as usual, have a nice day.